My name is Mia. I'm 30 years old, and I have a ridiculous weakness for people everyone else walks past. The kind of people my brother calls lost causes. That night started like a celebration. We were at an upmarket restaurant, the kind with tiny portions and prices that make your stomach clench before the food even arrives. I'd just come from the shelter, still smelling faintly of fried onions from the dinner shift, when my brother leaned back in his chair, wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, and stared at me like I was the punchline to his favorite joke. My brother mocked my kindness. "You're a failure. Even the homeless have more worth," is the sentence that still rings in my head, but the way he said it was worse than the words. He laughed as he dug into the steak I had paid for with the extra shift I picked up that week. He waved his fork toward the window where a homeless man had been standing earlier. "At least he doesn't pretend he's doing something important. You're just wasting your life on people who will never pay you back." The table went quiet. I felt my face burn, but I didn't defend myself. I watched him. This man who had been praised our whole lives for being smart with money, this golden child of our family's company, brag about his bonus while insulting the people whose names I knew, whose stories I carried home every night. Inside, something snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in that quiet way that changes everything. I let him finish, let him laugh, let him feel powerful. Then I calmly asked for the bill, slid my card across the table, and stood up. "Enjoy dinner," I said. "It's on the failure." I walked out into the cool night air with my chest tight and my hands shaking. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew one thing. I would never let him make my kindness feel small again. And I had no idea that just 2 weeks from that moment, the same mouth that mocked me would be stuttering in front of a boardroom, broke and exposed, with me holding the receipts. Before I tell you exactly what he said that night, and how, just 2 weeks later, his perfect life collapsed, do me a favor. Tell me what time it is for you right now, and where you're watching from the comments. I'm genuinely curious how far this story about family, money, and revenge is going to travel. 2 weeks after that dinner, my life looked almost exactly the same on the surface, but everything felt different under my skin. I still woke up before sunrise, grabbed bad coffee from the machine, and headed to the charity where I worked. I still listened to stories most people would rather not hear. How someone lost their job, their health, their home, their dignity, one small step at a time. But now, every time I handed over a meal tray or a clean blanket, I heard my brother's voice in the back of my mind, mocking the people across the table from me, mocking me. Instead of crushing me, it did something unexpected. It sharpened me. I started keeping a little mental list, almost like a private diary in my head. Day 1 after the dinner. Don't cry about what he said. Turn it into fuel. Day 3. Stop replaying his laugh. Start replaying every time someone at the shelter smiled in relief because you showed up. Day 5. Remember that your worth is not tied to his approval or his money. Around day 7, I noticed something else. His world and mine weren't as separate as I'd pretended. The family company, the one he proudly called his empire, funded a big chunk of the charity where I worked. It was branded as corporate responsibility, glossy photos and staged smiles, but that money kept the lights on, and rumors started to float in. At first, it was small talk in the break room, a staff member waving her phone with a gossip article open saying, "Isn't this your brother's company? People are saying something is weird with their numbers." I brushed it off, but the word weird stuck in my throat. A few days later, I got a text from an old college friend, Eliza, the one who used to fall asleep over finance textbooks and now lived in spreadsheets like they were novels. "Hey Mia, random question. Are you involved at all with the investments your family company is making lately?" I stared at the screen. I wasn't. I had deliberately stayed out of that world. Why? I typed back. The phone rang almost immediately. Eliza didn't waste time with small talk. There are some funds tied to your family's company that keep showing up in places they don't belong, she said. High-risk ventures, shell names, stuff that smells bad. I recognized the company name and thought, either someone's being reckless or someone's hiding something. My stomach dropped. I pictured my brother at that restaurant, leaning back as if the entire city belonged to him. Are you sure? I whispered. Eliza hesitated. I'm sure the math doesn't lie. Look, I'm not saying anything illegal for sure, but if you ever wanted to look closer, now might be the time. Because if this goes wrong, it won't just hit your family. It'll hit every charity, every employee, everyone tied to those funds. After the call, I sat in the tiny staff kitchen staring at the cracked tile floor. Loyalty is a strange thing. We grow up being told family is everything, that you protect your own. But what if your own is quietly endangering hundreds of people who don't have a safety net? What if the person laughing at the homeless man outside the window is the same person quietly pulling the rug out from under them? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there asking myself the kind of question that claws at your conscience. When you discover that someone you love might be the villain in someone else's story, do you stay silent to keep the peace? Or do you become the one who lights the fuse? Once I'd heard Eliza's warning, I couldn't unhear it. Numbers had never scared me, but this time they felt like landmines. I decided to stop pretending I wasn't part of the family business just because I didn't show up at the office. My last name was literally on the building. That gave me more access than I'd ever bothered to use. So I started my own quiet investigation, not like a movie scene with dramatic music, more like a series of small, tense moments that added up. It began with me driving to my mother's house just to visit, and casually asking if I could use Dad's old study to look through some family tax stuff for my own records. She smiled, happy I was finally showing interest in anything that sounded like numbers and legacy, and handed me the keys. That room still smelled like his aftershave and paper dust. I sat at the big desk, opened the filing cabinets I'd ignored as a teenager, and pulled out everything with the company letterhead and my brother's signature. At first, it all looked clean, but I remembered Eliza's voice. Look for patterns, not single shocks. So I started laying folders out in rows, scribbling notes on sticky pads, tracing the flow of money like it was a river. The river bent in strange ways. Funds labeled for community outreach were being redirected to strategic partnerships with companies I'd never heard of. I Googled them on my phone. Some had websites that looked like they'd been built overnight. Others had no footprint at all. The more I followed the trail, the colder my hands felt. I took photos of key documents, emailing copies to a secure folder Eliza had set up for me, hidden under a boring name that wouldn't draw attention. At one point, I heard footsteps in the hallway and nearly dropped my phone. I shoved the papers back into a drawer, heart banging against my ribs, and tried to look casual as the door opened. It wasn't my brother, thank God. It was my mom bringing in tea, eyes soft with pride that I was finally taking an interest in the business. The guilt sliced through me, because the more I saw, the more I suspected that what I was doing wasn't just snooping, it was betrayal, at least by family standards. That night, after I left the house with a folder for further review, I called Eliza again. We went line by line over the documents in a shared screen. This isn't just reckless, she said slowly. These transfers, they're either laundering money through fake entities or parking it in projects that are guaranteed to implode while someone quietly cashes out on the side. Someone? I asked, but we both knew who he meant. Mia, if regulators look into this, your brother won't just lose his job, she warned. He could lose everything. There's potential fraud, embezzlement. This is serious. I leaned my forehead against the cool window glass. Outside, city lights flickered. Inside, my world tilted. If I do nothing, I whispered, the company collapses eventually, right? And the charity and the staff and the people we serve? Yes, she said softly. If you act, you might blow it up faster, but at least you can control how the pieces fall. After the call, I went to the shelter to help serve dinner. Henry, one of our regulars, gave me a curious look. You look like you've seen a ghost, he said, taking his tray. I forced a smile. Maybe I have, I answered. Or maybe I've just realized the ghost has my last name. I lay awake that night wrestling with a brutal question. If exposing the truth meant burning down the illusion of the perfect family I'd grown up with, did I have the right to strike the match? The next turning point didn't happen in an office or in front of a computer. It happened on a cracked park bench with a man everyone else crossed the street to avoid. Henry had always intrigued me. He was rough around the edges, sure, sunburnt skin, beard too long, clothes that had seen better years. But there was something in the way he spoke, little slips of vocabulary and references that didn't fit the stereotype. That day, after we wrapped up a lunch service downtown, I found him sitting alone, staring at the skyline like he was looking at an old enemy. I handed him a coffee and sat down beside him. You ever feel like the city forgot you? I asked. He snorted. Oh, I don't know, he said. Sometimes I feel like I forgot the city first. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of traffic filling the gaps. Then he turned to me. You've been distracted lately, he said. More than usual. You listening with your ears, but your head spinning somewhere else. I hesitated. We'd talked about life in broad strokes before, but never about my family. Today, the weight was too much to carry alone. What would you do? I asked slowly. If you found out someone in your family was using money that was supposed to help people like you to play risky games? Henry's eyes sharpened in a way I'd never seen. I'd say that doesn't sound like a hypothetical question, he replied. And I'd also say, I've seen it up close. My heart skipped. What do you mean? He rubbed his jaw, eyes distant. I used to wear a suit, he said. Worked for a mid-sized firm that got swallowed by a bigger company. Thought it was my big break. We were brought in under the banner of some family-owned success story. The Golden Sun gave a speech about values and community. I sat there thinking, this guy could sell water to a fish. A chill ran down my spine. What was the company called? I asked, even though I already knew. When he said my last name, I felt my throat tighten. I didn't work directly under your brother, he continued, answering a question I hadn't voiced. But I saw his signature enough times. Little things bugged me. Budgets that didn't add up. Projects getting funded on paper, but nothing happening on the ground. Then one day I was asked to sign off on a report that, let's just say it made numbers behave like a magic trick. He glanced at me. I refused. A month later, I was let go in a restructuring. Severance paid? Hush, hush. The downward slide started from there. My hands went cold. Why didn't you say anything? I asked. He laughed without humor. Say what? That a respected company with a shiny golden boy at the front was cooking its books? Who would believe the mid-level guy who suddenly can't find work anywhere? It was easier for everyone to pretend I was the problem. He reached into his worn backpack and pulled out an old envelope, creased and stained. I kept copies of some things, he said. Call it stubbornness, or stupidity, or maybe I knew that one day someone on the inside might actually care. Inside the envelope were printouts, emails, draft reports, spreadsheets with red circles around strange entries. Some of the project names matched the shell companies Eliza and I had spotted. There were notes in the margins in Henry's handwriting. No deliverable, no staff. Funds moved again. Why are you giving this to me? I whispered. Because you're the only person from that world who's treated me like a human being instead of a cautionary tale, he answered. And because if your brother is still running things the way he did back then, this train is heading for a wall. People like me will get crushed under it. People like you will get blamed for not seeing it. So I'm asking you, are you going to keep serving soup and hoping it magically gets better? Or are you ready to go for the engine? I stared at the papers, at the ink that proved my suspicions weren't paranoia. My brother hadn't just insulted my kindness. He'd built a career on twisting the image of kindness into a shield for greed. The faces from the shelter floated in my mind. I thought of my mother, blissfully proud of her successful son, of my father's name on the building, of Henry, whose whole life had been shaken loose because he refused to lie. We talk a lot about rock bottom at the charity. I realized, sitting on that bench, that I wasn't at rock bottom. I was at a crossroads, and whichever path I picked would crack something open forever. Once I decided to act, time started moving in this strange double-speed way. On the surface, my days looked normal. Emails, meetings at the charity, grocery runs. But underneath, everything was counting down to one moment, the board meeting. The one where I would walk into my brother's kingdom and accuse him, in front of the people who trusted him, of tearing it apart from the inside. Eliza helped me turn the chaos of documents into a story the board couldn't ignore. You can't just throw numbers at them, she said one night, our screens glowing in the dark. You have to show them the pattern and what it means in real lives. If they feel like you're attacking their golden boy without caring about the company, they'll shut down. We built a timeline, Henry's documents from years ago at the front, the first suspicious transfers, the shell companies appearing, the charity funds being redirected, the rising personal expenditures disguised as business costs, the risky investments that made no sense except as cover. Every page was a step my brother had taken away from integrity and toward self-destruction. I added photos from the shelter, with names removed for privacy but stories attached. Not as manipulation, but as context. This is who gets hurt when greed hijacks generosity. Day -7. I requested a slot at the next board meeting, officially, to discuss the company's community initiatives and risk management strategies. It sounded harmless enough on paper. Day -5. One of the older board members called me. Is something wrong, Mia? He asked gently. It's unusual to see you requesting time. My voice wobbled, but I kept it steady. I've come across information that affects the company's future, I said. It would be irresponsible not to share it. There was a pause on the line. You sound like your father, he murmured. That cut deeper than he knew. Day -3. My mother called, thrilled. Your brother says you're finally joining a board meeting, she said. He's so proud you're taking an interest. He thinks you might want to help with the foundation side of things. I had to sit down. Mom, I said carefully, what if the way things are being run isn't what Dad would have wanted? She laughed, a little shaky. Oh, honey, you've always been too sensitive about money. Your brother knows what he's doing. Her certainty felt like a wall I couldn't climb yet. Day -1. I met Henry in a quiet corner near the shelter. I gave him a copy of an official statement confirming that a review of his termination had found procedural inconsistencies, along with a modest settlement I'd convinced one sympathetic board member to approve quietly. It wasn't enough to erase what he'd lost, but it was a start. Whatever happens tomorrow, I told him, you're not crazy and you're not invisible. He folded the paper with shaking hands. You know he's not going to go down quietly, right? He said. Men like that don't just apologize and walk away. They drag everyone with them if they can. I nodded. I know. The morning of the meeting, I woke up before my alarm. The city was still dark. I sat at the edge of my bed and whispered the question that had been haunting me. Am I doing this because it's right, or because I want revenge for the way he treated me? The answer, annoyingly, was both. And maybe that was okay. Maybe justice and revenge are cousins that sometimes hold hands. The boardroom smelled like coffee and polished wood when I walked in. The long table gleamed under the lights. My brother sat at his usual spot near the head, immaculate suit, easy smile, the same man who had laughed at me over steak 2 weeks earlier. "There she is," he said loudly for everyone to hear. "Our resident saint, ready to tell the board how to save the world one soup bowl at a time." A few people chuckled. I met his eyes and, for the first time, didn't look away. "Actually," I said, sliding my folder onto the table, "I'm here to talk about how to save the company." I watched the smile falter, just a fraction. The countdown had hit 0. If you've never stood in front of a room full of powerful people and told them their favorite son might be a fraud, let me tell you, it doesn't feel brave. It feels like standing in front of a firing squad with nothing but a folder in your hands. The meeting began as usual, with reports and projections and polite laughs. My brother spoke confidently about aggressive growth and strategic risk, phrases that sounded impressive enough to smooth over any doubts. When the chair finally turned to me and said, "Mia, you requested some time," the room shifted. Some faces softened, expecting a heartfelt speech about charity. Others looked mildly bored. My brother leaned back, arms crossed, wearing that tolerant smile people reserve for children who want to say something cute. I plugged in my laptop, hand steady despite the tremor in my chest. "Thank you," I began. "I know I'm not usually in this room. I prefer the side of our work where I can see who we're actually helping. But what I've learned in the last 2 weeks makes it impossible for me to stay outside these walls." I clicked to the first slide. A simple timeline, dates and dollar amounts. No drama, just facts. I explained what Eliza and I had found, walking them through the flow of money from community funds into dead-end entities, then disappearing into a fog of fake projects and personal luxuries. I showed them one document from Henry's envelope, his name redacted to protect him, that matched a pattern still in play today. At first, the room was quiet in that polite, indulgent way. Then one board member frowned, another leaned forward. The chair asked me to go back 2 slides. My brother laughed, a sharp sound that cut across my words. "Okay, I think we've heard enough," he said. "Mia, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you're misinterpreting standard practices. These are normal vehicles for hedging risk. We can't expect everyone to understand the complexity of high-level finance." It was a neat little slap disguised as an explanation. I'd expected it. "Maybe," I replied. "So let's make it simple." I clicked the next slide, where Eliza had helped me compile something even they couldn't brush off. A comparison between projects that existed only on paper and the photos of the community served that were actually stock images pulled from the internet. Murmurs rippled around the table. One board member pinched the bridge of his nose. Another whispered, "This is bad," under her breath. My brother's jaw tightened. "Stock images?" he scoffed. "Seriously? You're trying to destroy my reputation over stock images and half-understood spreadsheets?" I took a breath. "This isn't about your reputation," I said. "This is about whether the money people trusted you with, our employees, our partners, our community, has been used honestly." I spoke with someone who used to work for us years ago. He refused to sign off on falsified reports and was conveniently restructured out of a job. The pattern started back then. It's just bigger now. "So this is revenge," he snapped. "Some disgruntled ex-employee and my jealous little sister teaming up because they can't stand to see me succeed." His words hit the table like poison. A couple of board members looked uncomfortable but not entirely convinced. This was the dangerous moment, the one where the story could tilt either way. I felt anger flare, but I kept my voice even. Do you really want to frame this as jealousy? I asked quietly. Because if this is jealousy, why did I bring copies of these documents to our legal counsel before this meeting? I slid another folder across the table toward the company's lawyer, who had been silent until now. And why is it that when they ran a preliminary review last night, I nodded at her, they confirmed that several of these structures violate our own internal policies and potentially external regulations? All eyes swung to the lawyer. She cleared her throat, uncomfortable. Without making any definitive statements before a full investigation, she said carefully, I can confirm there are serious concerns, enough that we are legally obligated to freeze certain accounts and notify the appropriate authorities if these patterns are verified. The room went very still. My brother's face drained of color. You went behind my back? He whispered, the charm gone, revealing something harder underneath. You brought lawyers into this? Do you have any idea what you've done? I thought about every late-night shift, every person who had thanked me for a bowl of soup that barely scratched their hunger. I thought about Henry on that bench with his envelope. I thought about my father, who used to say, if you look away from the truth long enough, it stops being ignorance and becomes complicity. Yes, I said, I know exactly what I've done. Board members started speaking over each other. We need an independent audit. We can't let this leak before we understand the scope. How long has this been going on? Through the chaos, the chair finally raised his voice. Enough, he said. He looked at my brother. Until this is resolved, we have a duty to protect the company and to everyone connected to it. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all decision-making authority. Access to discretionary funds will be frozen pending investigation. My brother shot to his feet. You can't do this, he shouted. Based on what? Her? She's been playing savior with the homeless while I built this company. His voice cracked on the last word. I stood too, not in anger, but because it felt wrong to let him loom over me. You mocked the very people whose suffering you used as a PR shield, I said quietly. You built your success on an image of generosity while siphoning money away from the causes you bragged about. You called me a failure for choosing kindness. Maybe you're right. I'm not rich. But if being a success means being what you've become, I'll gladly stay a failure. For a second, we just stared at each other, brother and sister on opposite sides of a line that could never be erased now. The board voted formally to suspend him and authorize a full external investigation. It felt surreal hearing the words. When the meeting adjourned, people filed out in stunned silence. He paused in the doorway, turned back to me, and said under his breath, You think you won? You've just nuked our family. You'll regret this when they come for you too. I watched him leave, shaking, not because I doubted what I'd done, but because I knew he was right about one thing. Nothing about our lives would ever be the same again. If this were a simple revenge story, it would end right there, with the board's decision and my brother's dramatic exit. But real life doesn't wrap itself up in one meeting. It unravels slowly, painfully, over weeks and months. The investigation that followed was brutal. External auditors combed through every account, every transfer, every contract. What Eliza and I had uncovered was just the tip of an iceberg made of arrogance and shortcuts, fake vendors, overstated profits, funds meant for community projects rerouted into ventures that conveniently benefited a small circle of people, including my brother. Regulators stepped in. Quiet rumors became official inquiries. The media eventually caught wind because scandals like this don't stay in boardrooms. Headlines started appearing. Beloved family company under fire for misused charity funds. They used words like betrayal and double life and fall from grace. The golden boy image shattered fast. Contracts were canceled. Partners pulled back. Lawsuits followed. Our stock price dipped, then plunged. On a spreadsheet, it looked like numbers falling. In real life, it looked like people losing sleep, jobs, certainty. There's nothing satisfying about watching something your father built get dismantled, even when you know it has to happen to save what's left. As for my brother, the consequences hit him in waves. First came the formal termination from his position. Then, as more evidence piled up, civil suits. Eventually, criminal charges were filed. Fraud, embezzlement, misrepresentation. The kind of words that don't disappear from your record. His accounts were frozen, properties put up as collateral. The fancy car he'd once bragged about had to be sold. The man who laughed at me for paying for his dinner while he flashed his wealth ended up arguing with lawyers about which of his watches he was allowed to sell to cover his fees. I found out through a mutual acquaintance that he'd moved into a much smaller apartment on the edge of town, far from the neighborhoods he used to flaunt. "He's not doing well?" they said. "He says you ruined his life." That hurt more than I expected. Not because I believed it, but because part of me still remembered the brother who used to sneak me extra dessert when mom wasn't looking, the one who taught me how to ride a bike, the one I had tried to impress for years by making myself small so he could shine. My mother took it the hardest. For a while she barely spoke to me, caught between gratitude that the truth was out and grief for the son she'd lost, not to death, but to his own choices. We had shouting matches that ended in tears, and quiet nights where we sat on the couch, both staring at the family photos on the wall and wondering how we'd missed the cracks forming. Slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild. The company restructured under new leadership, with strict oversight on every charitable initiative. I was asked, officially this time, to lead a division focused on genuine community investment, with clear metrics and transparency. I said yes, on one condition, that we listened to the people on the ground before deciding what they needed. Henry was one of the first people I hired as a consultant, not as a charity case, but as someone who understood both the corporate world and what it felt like to be left on the sidewalk. Watching him walk into the office building again, wearing a clean shirt and holding his head high, was one of the few moments that felt purely good in the middle of the mess. "Feels strange," he admitted, looking up at the logo with my last name on it. "Coming back here on my own terms." "You earned it," I said. "You tried to tell the truth years ago. I'm just late to the party." The shelter continued its work, more stable now that the funding was honest and realistic instead of flashy and inflated. I still served meals, still listened to stories, but now, when I looked at the faces across the table, I didn't just feel guilt and helplessness. I felt a responsibility tied to power I hadn't wanted but couldn't ignore anymore. And my brother? He went through his trial. I watched from the back row, anonymous among reporters and strangers, as lawyers argued over intent and responsibility. He never once turned around to look for me. When the verdict came, guilty on several counts, with a sentence that included prison time and heavy restitution, I didn't feel the triumph I thought I would. I felt tired, relieved that other people wouldn't be hurt by his decisions anymore, sad for the boy he used to be, angry that he'd forced all of us into this position. That night, I walked past the restaurant where he'd mocked me, the place where this version of the story began. Through the window, another family was laughing over dinner. I wondered what invisible battles were hiding behind their smiles. Life went on. It always does. People still ended up at the shelter, still needed help, still made mistakes and needed second chances. Sometimes I'd catch myself asking, did I do this to prove him wrong? Or to prove to myself that kindness isn't weakness? The honest answers stay the same. Both. Maybe that's what makes this a revenge story and a justice story at the same time. My brother mocked my kindness and called me a failure. 2 weeks later, he started losing everything he'd built on lies. Months later, he stood in court with nothing but a suit he could barely afford and a name that no longer impressed anyone. And me? I'm still here, still choosing the work he mocked, still believing that compassion is not the opposite of strength. It's the proof of it. So now I want to ask you the question that stayed with me through all of this. If someone in your family was hurting others to protect their own success, would you stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you risk blowing everything up to do what's right? And if you've ever had your kindness mocked or taken for granted, tell me in the comments. Because I promise you, you're not the only failure whose heart turned out to be stronger than everyone expected.